Welcome back everybody to New Austin, Red Dead Redemption and Red Dead Redemption 2's sparsely populated, arid desert region, a rugged, unforgiving state, rife with outlaws. To survive in this environment, one must endure a lawless land where hardship is to be expected at every turn. And at the heart of New Austin is the town of Armadillo, a lonely settlement that has far from seen a thriving history. By the events of Red Dead Redemption, in recent history, Armadillo has experienced various plagues: scarlet fever, desert plague, and then a typhus outbreak, followed by cholera in 1907. This would drive out many inhabitants and cause many more to die. In the epilogue of Red Dead Redemption 2, we experience Armadillo in 1907, completely torn down by disease and at the mercy of the local Del Lobo gang. Though in 1911, in Red Dead Redemption, the town appears to have recovered from its constant misfortune with regards to sicknesses, but that's not to say that it's now an easy place to live. It's far from thriving even still. To live here is hard enough, but to police a place like this is nigh on impossible. And that brings us to the subject for today's video. One that I'm presenting to you courtesy of YouTuber and Red Dead theorist Kid Colt, who contacted me regarding a theory about Armadillo's Marshal Johnson. It's a neat theory regarding overlooked details in the original Red Dead Redemption that I feel was worthy of all of our time. Naturally, all appropriate credit will be found in the description, but please enjoy as we explore Marshal Johnson's potential secret. Let's begin this video with a touch of backstory, shall we? Lee Johnson was born around the year 1860 and in 1897 became the District Marshal of Armadillo. However, due to the cholera epidemic affecting Armadillo in 1907, Johnson temporarily left Armadillo along with many of the town's residents. We meet Marshal Lee Johnson in 1911 during John's pursuit of Bill Williamson. Johnson presents himself as a hardy and to-the-point lawman, a tough, seemingly morally upright character. However, he's not naive and understands that he cannot possibly hope to right every wrong. He's also a skilled gunman who has no trouble fighting alongside his comrades should the need arise. He is typically calm, collected, and clearly very experienced. And he does what he can, in his own words, to keep Armadillo from becoming a living hell. However, his efforts aren't registered by the locals with appreciation. On the whole, if anything, the residents of Armadillo and Red Dead Redemption are suspicious of him, and can be heard sharing interesting rumours.
I heard the gang of Twin Rocks is in cahoots with Marshal Johnson. They hung that counterfeiter last week. Woo! It was frightening. They say Marshal Johnson's buried stolen goods out at Rio Del Lobo.
We'll unpack this further shortly. However, for the time being, it's very clear that the residents of Armadillo, at the very least, have spread rumours implicating that Marshal Johnson isn't all that he seems. Whether or not that's the truth is a different story. However, I would imagine moral compromises would be quite necessary in policing an environment as hostile as New Austin. However, Marshal Johnson is quite open about having to compromise.
What's happening?
Right now? I got the railway, the people who pay my salary, trying to get me to turn a blind eye to them burning down settlements up there. I got a bunch of cattle rustlers out near Box Canyon, needs shutting down. Not forgetting the gang that keeps murdering homesteaders out in the back country. And I got a bunch of hoods over in the saloon, drunk, threatening to shoot up the whole town. That's all I got today. But it's early yet. Give me a couple more days. There'll be more.
Marshal Johnson gives away two pieces of information here. First and foremost, the people paying his salary want him to turn a blind eye to the railway companies burning down settlements. He can't be an all-round hero even if he wanted to, because there are forces at play holding significantly more power than he does that could make his life very difficult should he choose to obstruct the progress of capitalism. And then he lists a handful of other situations that he's concurrently juggling. He doesn't have the manpower at his disposal to deal with all of these problems at once. Altogether, no matter how hard he tries or doesn't try, there will always be somebody somewhere who comes out of the situation above the law. Having to make these compromises and choosing his battles doesn't make him necessarily a bad person. He's just no hero, and he'd be the first to admit it. Therefore, above all else, to the vast majority of residents in Armadillo, he's just another man doing his job. The Red Dead Redemption games do their best to break away from the romanticized version of the Old West that you might be used to in westerns. Whilst a bit of that romantic flair remains, the main purpose is to blur the lines and also explore the deeper realities, and the reality is, being a lawman in the Old West was far from a glamorous role. But let's not get too far ahead of ourselves on that note, as I'm sure expanding on that will play further into this topic later on. I'm not arguing that Marshal Johnson doesn't have Armadillo's interests at heart, but there is plenty to suggest that there's more to this character than he is when we meet him. Let's throw in another example highlighted by the origin of this theory kid cult.
Not a bad shot, Mr. Marston. Why don't you check in with me next time you're in town?
I don't want to be no policeman, Marshal.
Nor did I, my friend, I can promise you that. I'll see you soon, Mr. Marston.
This may seem like a nothing statement, a joke, but when you consider the broader story of Red Dead Redemption, it's certainly an interesting thing, because it could actually be Marshal Johnson empathizing with John Marston's situation. John is a former outlaw who simply wishes to live a simpler life now and be left alone. However, he's being coerced by shady government bureaucrats to hunt down his former gang members. Who's to say he's the first of his like that this has happened to, and it's certainly not a one-size-fits-all situation. At the very least, it leads me to believe that Marshal Johnson once upon a time never envisioned himself as a lawman. Perhaps his previous occupation was something further detached from the law. Considering his ability in shootouts and his experience, he certainly hasn't shied away from fights throughout his lifetime, so you'd imagine that would only leave a few possibilities. But above all else, my belief is it wasn't his choice to become the Marshal of Armadillo. If his past was somewhat shadier than his present, it would make sense as to why there are rumours around town suggesting he's in cahoots with outlaws currently, even if that's not the case. So you guessed it, it's time to actually investigate those rumours. Baxter Deaton, a character who can be encountered in the Armadillo Bank, can be heard saying that he heard Marshal Johnson is in cahoots with the gang up at Twin Rocks. This gang is of course the Walton Gang. It appears as if this NPC is quite the gossip, so founded or not, this rumour is unable to be verified. But there is something else that he says that's perhaps even more interesting.
They say Marshal Johnson's buried stolen goods out at Rio Del Lobo.
So, according to Baxter Deaton, Marshal Johnson stored stolen goods over at Rio Del Lobo. The location Rio Del Lobo Rock actually shows up during the Treasure Hunter challenges. However, before we get to that point, we first need to head to the Hanging Rock and find the treasure there, as it also comes with the hint that leads us to Rio Del Lobo Rock.
Some while back, there was this gang running in the plains outside of Armadillo. Mean sorts. They all got killed or arrested years back for one thing or another, and weren't no one sorry to see the back of them. But rumor has it that before the last of them got done, they'd hid their treasure out on them plains.
I bet.
I heard they buried it somewhere out there called the Hanging Rock. I reckon that rock might just be worth finding.
The treasure found here supposedly belongs to a gang that's been wiped out one way or another. However, it comes with the hint for the Rio Del Lobo treasure. You'll notice on this treasure map, the thing that defines it from the previous one is the passage of text that you can't really make out. However, the first thing you can read says what appears to be M.LJ, which may be an abbreviation for Marshal Lee Johnson. And considering this map is leading us to the exact same location where rumour has it Marshal Lee Johnson stashed away some hidden stolen treasure. Suddenly, Armadillo's very own town gossips remarks that Marshal Lee Johnson may be in cahoots with criminals may hold some weight. So therefore, could the Marshal have a genuine connection with the Walton Gang? There's no real evidence to back this up, and a broken clock is right twice a day with regards to the other rumour turning up true, but there are circumstances to consider here. By 1911, the Walton Gang is one of the most dangerous outlaw gangs found in New Austin. They're ruthless, and they also dominate vast swathes of land around the town of Armadillo. They're even comfortable drinking in the saloon inside of town with everybody well aware who they are. Even Marshal Johnson knows they are there, but is reluctant to act upon it until John Marston shows up and offers to aid him in a bid to lighten Marshal Johnson's load so he can help John track down Bill Williamson. Simply put, it doesn't appear as if they are necessarily in cahoots.
Walton's gang's been terrorizing folk around here for months now. Robbing stages, kidnapping, and the like. It's getting like the old days again, with the Undertaker being the most prosperous fella in this town.
And the bartender, by the sound of things.
Walton's a walking whiskey rat, but a sly one. Always 2 jumps ahead of the law. I hear his boys have been in the saloon for hours, bending their arms and getting their poke.
Doesn't sound like they're worried about lying low.
This is as good a chance as any to apprehend those sons of bitches.
I think it's fair to say the Marshal didn't want to pounce too early and open up the town to an even bigger problem with Walton's gang, knowing full well that he alone could not stop them. So it may be possible that the Marshal had some form of arrangement with the gang that stopped things from getting out of hand in the meantime, knowing full well that he'd flip on them one day and stop them. There's no evidence necessarily to support that, besides from the fact that to police a region as lawless and unmonitored as this, compromises would be a necessary part of the job, and the Marshal's already expressed that he needs to choose his battles, but that in itself overlooks a detail, and that detail is the Marshal's skill. In the Blackwater Ledger and Sentinel issue number 213, which can be found in the epilogue, there are some interesting articles and segments for sure. However, none are quite as interesting as the article documenting the Marshal's retirement. And it reads as follows: Marshal Johnson of Armadillo retires. At the age of 54, Mr. Johnson, who served as town marshal for 17 years, is credited with taking down some of New Austin's most notorious outlaws, including Walton's Gang, the Two Crows Boys, One Lung Lester Riley, the Bollard Twins, and Wildcat Willie. Armadillo residents held a riotous leaving party in his honor at the town's saloon, at which he arrested 3 men and reportedly was the last man standing at the end of the night. When asked about his plans for the future, he said he would be moving as far away from Armadillo as humanly possible. So in his 17 years as the Marshal of Armadillo, Johnson appears to have been quite prolific when it comes to shutting down criminal organizations. And during our time fighting alongside Marshal Johnson in Red Dead Redemption, we see him in action. We know he's good at what he does. He deals with criminal factions capably, aggressively, and fearlessly. So why did he let the Walton Gang run rampant around his town for months? Robbing stagecoaches, terrorizing people, kidnapping. You'd have thought, seeing how he handles himself, he would have taken matters into his own hands sooner. He even has to be convinced by John to take out Walton Lowe, the leader of the gang, who can be captured either dead or alive. However, both scenarios wind up with him being shot. Even if Walton Lowe is arrested, however, this is where things get interesting. The newspaper that follows will read that he died from a gunshot. Perhaps in this scenario he contracted an infection in a flesh wound and died, but that would be an anticlimax, and storytelling 101? Try to avoid those. Either way, the last person to be seen with Walton Lowe whilst he was alive is none other than Marshal Lee Johnson. So did the Marshal kill him on the way back to town? Because it doesn't say he was executed. Considering he was likely going to be hanged anyway, why would Johnson want to avoid a spectacle if it made no difference? Perhaps there is something the Marshal doesn't want to become public knowledge. But again, there's no real evidence for this besides from a rumour suggesting he's in cahoots with the gang. And he certainly isn't involved with them in a proactive sense. He's not on their side either. I think that's pretty clear. but it honestly would not surprise me if something underhanded were to have gone on between the Marshal and the Walton Gang. What's also interesting on top of this is, though he's more than happy to go and take on other gangs at their own hideouts, he isn't that way with the Walton Gang, whose hideout is located at Twin Rocks, not too far from Armadillo. Granted, his missions aren't designed to introduce the gang hideouts. The stranger missions with Jimmy Saint do that, but his missions do take us to some gang hideouts. There are two possible explanations. Taking Walton Low down was a message to the remainder of the gang to not take the piss, or canonically that was the end of the Walton Gang, and they exist in the open world after the fact, so that to the player the world still feels lived in. After all, what's canon versus what's presented to the player in the open world can often vary slightly or even massively. But it's time to move on from that particular note. There is one final aspect to consider, and it's a dialogue exchange between Marshal Johnson and an outlaw during the mission Hanging Bonnie McFarlane.
I want Norman Deke. I want him set free. Then you get your daughter back, mister.
We don't do deals with outlaws, boy.
Yeah, you do! Let's not waste each other's time pretending otherwise. Old government themselves ain't much more than a bunch of crooks. This is the land of opportunity, mister. And I'm giving you the opportunity to get your daughter back.
First and foremost, this doesn't mean he does do deals with outlaws. What it means is he does deals with the government, and the government are no strangers to unethical practices themselves. The difference between a government official and an outlaw is who's accepted to have money and power, and who has to take it. But with regards to how this applies to Marshal Johnson, being morally upstanding and uncompromising is not the most effective tactic for dealing with bad people in the real world. Or at least this version of the world. This is not a black and white land of good versus evil. It exists in the grey area. In real history, lawmen in the Old West were often recruited due to their skills as gunmen, meaning many in towns such as this would have led previous lives as outlaws themselves. The line dividing enforcing the law from breaking it was an incredibly blurry one. Thus, being able to think like an outlaw was a crucial skill for lawmen in regions such as this. Lee Johnson has been the Marshal of Armadillo for 14 years as of when we meet him in 1911. He would not have received such a posting without prior experience, and in failing that, he would have died very quickly if he did not know what he was doing. He's clearly an experienced gun, and there are rumours that he's affiliated with criminal organisations, alongside rumours that he's buried stolen treasure out near Rio Del Lobo, where there coincidentally happens to be some hidden treasure. And the map that led us there is signed, albeit in a strange fashion, by an MLJ. He seems to understand the line he walks, and he makes it clear that his job is to prevent Armadillo from turning into a living hell. He doesn't state that he wishes to rid Armadillo of crime and transform it into a haven, as he knows that's just not possible. He also implies that once upon a time he never could have seen himself becoming a lawman. So whilst I believe that presently his efforts to protect Armadillo from harm are genuine, I also believe his background could be a slight bit shadier than face value will tell you. It appears as if in the past at least he's been more intimate with criminals than he is now, and maybe once upon a time he himself lived the life of an outlaw. And maybe this is why there are rumours around Armadillo suggesting that he's working with current outlaw gangs. And maybe he did even have some form of accord with the Walton Gang that's prevented them from overrunning his town. As for the treasure, maybe that was hidden for his retirement after being stolen from gangs. Or maybe it's just leftover stolen goods from his time on the other side of the law. There's certainly enough in this theory to raise questions about the Marshal's own past. However, whether or not he used to be a criminal himself is pure speculation. But please let me know what you think about this entire concept down in the comments section. Special thanks to Kid Colt for presenting this theory to me. All relevant links will be in the description. Thank you all for watching, I hope you enjoyed. Be sure to go ahead, leave a like, subscribe, share the channel with your friends and all that wonderful stuff. That would be awesome and also fantastic, to be honest. If you like history, maybe check out our history channel Decades. There's plenty of content over there, but if it's not for you, then don't worry about it. And of course, with any luck, I'll be seeing you all very soon with another video at some point. But until next time, please take care and goodbye.